Morning. I'm Vivek Silva, and I'll speak today on RSE in Catholic schools and how it's an opportunity to encourage dialogue between faith and culture. I want to preface this presentation with two quotations. One from Joan Chittister, who says it takes courage to speak the truth in public and say, I think differently about that, because that ultimately will turn heads and open hearts. And John Feehan, who says, when we are confronted by evidence that the faith in which we are brought up no longer provides an adequate explanation for the nature, meaning, and purpose of our lives, we have three choices. We can refuse to accept the evidence and continue as before. That would be intellectually dishonest, he says. You can abandon the faith you grew up with because it has proved to be inadequate, and that would amount to intellectual laziness. Or you can accept the new knowledge and use it to develop a more mature understanding of what lies at the core of our belief. And that, he says, is critical acceptance, which leads us to reinterpret the core concepts. And that requires courage and a plethora of other virtues that he says have been gathering dust in our spirit. So in the context of human sexuality, we are faced with that basic question, what does it mean to be truly human? And that is what our sexuality answers. My sexuality defines what it means for me as a person to be truly human. And it encompasses this huge spectrum of things that range from feelings and thoughts and behaviors to sexual activity, to gender identity and expression, our relationships, my self-image, my capacity to give and receive love. It's an integral part of who I am. And sexuality has always been a product of social and cultural influences of its time. So let's take, for example, a small sliver of how that has evolved and changed in Irish society. And I'm taking a very small sliver. From 1984, from the death of Anne Lovett to the death of Savita. Two tragic incidents, which I think bookend the full pendulum swing in how people or society began to view sexuality. And in that time between those two events, there's been major developments in and around Ireland and Europe. There's been that move towards secularization, detraditionalization, and individualization. There has been a steady decrease in religious practice and conviction of belief. The moral authority of the church in matters relating to children's rights and sexuality has eroded considerably. And many feel that the church is a cold place, it's legalistic, it's judgmental, and it's condemning. And the Ireland of today is a very different place, as was so beautifully articulated by Leo Varadkar when he addressed Pope Francis. Let me try and put that period of time from 1984 to 2012 and extend them out a little bit and see how the development of sexuality and the expression of it has gradually evolved in Ireland. I'm looking at that in the lifespan of the Eighth Amendment. In 1983, the Eighth Amendment was included in the Constitution, protecting the life of the unborn. In 2018, the Health Act, with the regulation of termination of pregnancy, brought the Eighth Amendment to its end. In between, you had the Family Planning Act, you had the decriminalization of same-sex activity, you had the Marriage Act of 2015 and the Gender Recognition Act of the same year. In that time, there has been a gradual changing in the understanding and expression of sexuality. And in a plural society, we must show the will and capacity to hold the tension of the multiplicity of religious and secular views that are expressed by its population when it comes to educating the young about the complexities of human relationships and sexuality. And the Department of Education has tried to keep pace with those changes in society, with its circulars that it has issued to schools. So in this period of time, there are many voices out there about RSE. Carl O'Brien would say, should schools be allowed to use their ethos to prevent pupils from accessing objective sex education? Deputy Paul Murphy believes that the ethos of a school, largely in religious-based schools, comes in the way of young people accessing RSE. Only a few students get the delivery of proper sex education through the youth services, which include discussion, non-ethos-based, factual and biologically correct education, says Deputy Breed Smith. Archbishop Eamon Martin says negative perceptions to an ethos-based approach to RSE in Catholic schools is unfair, harsh, uninformed, and agenda-driven. And there's a temptation in contemporary Irish discourse to dismiss religious belief as inherently irrational, divisive, and anti-intellectual. The JCES would maintain that the current SPHE curriculum in schools needs to be updated to give consideration to the significant and welcome changes that have taken place in Ireland today. These changes, I think, is what is being referred to in the infographic I showed just now. So what are our points? What do you say? What is your thought on RSE in schools and ethos-based schools today? Leo Varadkar, again, speaking to Pope Francis, said, in Ireland, where religion is no longer at the center of our society, but in which it still has an important place, I believe the time has come for us to build a new relationship between church and state in Ireland, a new covenant for the 21st century. For many, this image might describe how they feel about church at the moment. What was once grand appears to be in ruins. However, there are many people who still find solace in the music of the gospel. And if the music of the gospel ceases to sound in our homes, our public squares, our workplaces, our political and financial life, then we will no longer hear the strains that challenge us to defend the dignity of every man and woman. Underlying the basic question about our understanding of sexuality is the question of anthropology. How do I see the human person, and what does it mean to be human? And we can look at it from two different angles. We can look at it from a transactional anthropology that is shaped by capitalism, consumerism, and globalization. And this, says Dermot Lane, has led to the spiritual and cultural isolation of the self in the 21st century. Or we can look at it from a relational anthropology that believes that every human person is created in the image of God to be in relationship with others and the divine. It focuses on living for others. It picks up that old African Ubuntu saying, I am because you are. I am the sum of my relationships. I relate to people with respect and dignity. And every human person is an expression of God, without exception. Ronald Rolheiser says sexuality drives the lifelong desire for communion with something beyond ourselves. And he often says that sexuality and spirituality have the same root. They both seek communion and relationship with something beyond ourselves. So what is the Catholic understanding of sexuality? And I think it rests on four pillars. One, that sexuality is a gift from God. Two, that sexuality has love in its giving and receiving as its intrinsic end. that sexuality is realized in its fullness, not only by existing with someone, but existing for someone, and that sexuality is the intimate nucleus that enriches the whole person and contributes to the person's physical, psychological, and spiritual personality. And therefore, from a Catholic standpoint, relationship and sexuality education is the need for understanding, respect, and love of the other. It's the openness to dialogue that is rooted in faith. It is an understanding of the human person as created in the image of God. It needs to highlight the dignity of the embodied human person. And it must encourage the listening to the voice of one's conscience. Most of those, if not all of them, are reflected in the definition for RSE that was given by the Expert Advisory Group in 1995, where it defined RSE as a lifelong process of acquiring knowledge and understanding of human sexuality, developing attitudes, forming beliefs and values, establishing behaviors about sexual identity, relationships, and intimacy through formal opportunities and processes with a moral, spiritual, and social framework. That has now been developed and grown and defined now as relationship and sexuality education that equips learners, that empowers them to realize their health, that develops respectful social and sexual relationships, considers what the choices are and how they affect others, and understands and ensures the protection of their rights throughout their lives. Eamon Martin says, RSE in schools, in Catholic schools, needs to be in partnership with parents, that it has to be situated within the morals and values framework, that it seeks to promote a positive self-image, that it educates young people in taking responsibility and making well-informed decisions, and it must include age-appropriate information, debate, and discussion. So what is the issue then? Where is the point of divergence when it comes to faith and culture? And the point of divergence is what values, beliefs, and attitudes, what anthropology are we following, and what anthropology forms the basis of our RSE programs? And is that then where ethos becomes a barrier? Paul Meany says Catholic education will never simply further the ends of the state, nor simply meet the needs of the market, but will continue to be an informed examination of the place of the individual within his or her community and society. Catholic education, says Christus Vivek, must offer a fresh experience through a culture of genuine encounter, wide-ranging dialogue, mutual understanding, and collaborative partnership. In that same document, Pope Francis says, some Catholic schools seem to be structured for the sake of self-preservation. Fear of change makes them entrenched and defensive before the dangers, real or imagined, that any change might bring. A school that becomes a bunker, protecting its students from errors from without, is a caricature of this tendency. So moving forward, we have the option of either being Odysseus, when crossing that sea, threatened by the sirens, he tied himself to the post and covered the ears of his sailors with beeswax, so they couldn't hear the alluring song of the sirens that might shipwreck his little boat as it tried to cross the sea. Or we can be Orpheus, who said, I will cross that same sea, but instead of tying myself to the post and covering the ears of my sailors with beeswax, I will sing a song that is louder and bolder, that will not entice my ship to the song of the sirens. So the question we have to ask as we enter this space of dialogue between faith and culture is, are we prepared to sing a bold new song that is in tune with the Gospels and that acknowledges the living of that gospel in contemporary society? Thank you.